Daniel Carter had not spoken a word in 43 minutes. He stood at the grave the way men stand when standing is the only remaining option. Flowers in his left hand, white ones, because white was what Ethan had called the color of clouds, and clouds were the thing Ethan loved most about being in tall buildings with his father pressed against the cold glass, pointing at shapes that looked like animals or ships or countries on a map that only he could read. The stone was clean. Someone had washed it recently. The engraving was sharp enough to cut. Ethan James Carter, beloved son, gone too soon. Daniel had read those words so many times they no longer looked like words. They looked like a sentence he was serving. He placed the flowers at the base of the stone. He said the 3 sentences he always said. He waited for the silence to answer him, the way it never did. Then a small voice came from somewhere behind him. Your son never died. The flowers slipped from his fingers before he could decide to let them go. He turned. A girl. 8 years old, maybe 9. Standing 5 feet away with her hands folded in front of her, looking at him with the calm of a child who has rehearsed something 100 times before finding the courage to say it once. What did you say? His voice came out wrong. Too careful, too small for a man his size. Your son, she said again. He didn't die. She held his gaze without flinching. But there's something else you need to know first. Daniel stared at her. He stopped believing you'd come, she said. Those 6 words did what 11 months of grief had not managed. They reached through every layer of composure Daniel Carter had ever constructed and found something underneath that had no armor on it at all. He crouched down to her level. The voice he used now was reserved for things that mattered too much for volume. Tell me everything, he said. Leave nothing out. Her name was Annie. Her father Solomon worked the night shift 3 times a week at a private medical facility outside the city. A place with no signage, no public patient registry, no presence in any database a reasonable person would think to search. He cleaned the lower corridors. He kept his eyes forward. He needed the job. 6 weeks ago, Annie had been waiting for her father near the service entrance when she wandered down a corridor she had no business being in. A door had not fully closed. She heard crying through the gap. A boy. Thin. Connected to 2 machines. Drawing something on a piece of paper with a pencil stub held in fingers that had learned to be careful with resources. She pushed the door open. The boy looked at her the way people look at something they have stopped trusting themselves to believe in. You're real, he said. Yes, Annie told him. My name is Ethan. He said it quickly, the way you say something you have been keeping safe for a long time. My dad is Daniel Carter. He doesn't know where I am. She had visited for more times after that. Each time, Ethan asked the same question before she left. Did you find him yet? Each time she said not yet. But she had been coming to this cemetery every Tuesday morning for 3 weeks, watching the man who always came alone, who always stood at the same stone, who sometimes spoke to it in a voice too low to carry. Today she had decided to stop waiting. Daniel stood up slowly. He looked at the headstone. Then at Annie. Then at the headstone again, as if one of them could tell him which thing was real. How much time do we have? He asked. Annie's expression shifted in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten before she even spoke. I heard them talking 2 nights ago, she said. They're moving him. A pause. They said Friday. It was Tuesday morning. He pulled out his phone. He did not call Marcus Webb, his head of security for 9 years. He did not call anyone who had been present on the night Dr. Thorne had appeared at his house 11 months ago with the language of inevitability, the sealed paperwork, the careful explanation of biohazard protocols and why no viewing would be possible and why everything had already been handled. He scrolled to a name he had not dialed in over a year. Claire Ando. A forensic researcher who had once told him, quietly, that she owed him something she had not yet found the occasion to repay. He was about to give her the occasion. I need a private medical facility, he said when she answered. 40 kilometers from the city. No public registration. Buried under corporate layers. And Claire, whatever you find about who owns it, I need to know when it was first registered. A pause. How soon do you need it? Before tonight, Daniel said. Tell no one you're running this. Not anyone. He ended the call and looked at Annie. Is there somewhere safe you can? I'm coming with you, she said. Daniel started to object. Annie looked at him with the expression of someone who has already considered every counter-argument and found each one insufficient. Ethan trusts me, she said. He doesn't know you anymore. The sentence landed like a blade finding a gap in armor. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. They walked toward his car through the Tuesday morning quiet, leaving the headstone and the dropped flowers behind them. Claire called back in 4 hours and 21 minutes. 3 properties matched the criteria. 2 were explainable. The third was registered under a subsidiary of a subsidiary of a subsidiary, for corporate layers deep, connected at the base to a medical holdings group linked to 3 private research institutions. Daniel. Her voice changed on his name. The facility was registered 14 months ago. The line went quiet. That's 2 months before Ethan was taken. Daniel said nothing. There's something else. The research program connected to this group. I found published papers. Another pause. They focus on hematological rarities. Specifically Rh null phenotype. The papers reference ongoing harvest protocols in undisclosed clinical settings. There are 4 names on those papers. She stopped. One of them is Thorn. Rh null. Daniel had heard those words once, 11 years ago. A specialist. A maternity ward. Ethan as a newborn. The doctor had mentioned it the way doctors mention things they find academically interesting and clinically inconsequential. An extraordinarily rare blood type. Fewer than 50 documented cases in the world. Compatible with virtually any blood type. Invaluable for certain research purposes. Marcus had been at that appointment. Daniel recalled this now with the specific sharpness of a memory that has been sitting in a corner of the mind waiting for the correct moment to step forward. Marcus had asked follow-up questions. Thorough ones. Professional, Daniel had thought at the time. He pressed his free hand flat against the car window. Send me everything, he said. Daniel, Claire said quietly. Given the scale of this infrastructure, I don't think Ethan is the only one. He held that sentence in his mind for a long moment. Find out, he said. Everything you can find. Send it all. He went to Solomon that evening. Annie's father came to the door in his work clothes, already running late, and he looked at Daniel Carter on his landing and went very still in the way of a man who has been expecting a conversation he has been hoping would not come. Daniel told him everything. Solomon sat at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting. When it was finished he looked at his hands for a long time. I saw things, Solomon said quietly. I told myself they had explanations. He paused. There was a child's voice from that wing. Some nights. I walked faster when I passed it. I needed the job. You didn't know what you were looking at, Daniel said. I chose not to look, Solomon said. He said it plainly, without softening it or asking for absolution. Daniel looked at him. Your daughter looked. 6 times. For a boy she had never met before. Solomon was quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the building above them, a television played. The smell of someone else's dinner moved through the walls. She's always been like that, Solomon said finally. She sees something wrong and she cannot walk past it. He looked at Daniel. Tell me what you need me to do. The sealed legal package went to Daniel's attorney that night. It named Marcus Webb. It named Thorn. It documented the facility, the research program, the corporate structure, the financial transfers Claire had traced over the preceding 18 hours. The instructions were precise. If Daniel did not make contact within 72 hours, the package opened automatically to 3 separate legal authorities simultaneously. He called Paul Reyes at 11. Paul had broken 3 major institutional fraud stories and answered late calls with the specific alertness of someone who has learned that the important ones rarely come at reasonable hours. When this breaks, Daniel said, it needs to be complete. Documented. Irrefutable. What is it? My son. His blood. The people I trusted most. Daniel paused. And Paul. I believe there are other children. I need you to be ready for a story that is larger than one family. The silence on the other end had a quality he recognized. Not surprise. The recognition of something real. Tell me everything, Paul said. Thursday night. 11 minutes before the facility's eastern corridor shift change. Daniel followed Solomon through the service entrance. Head angled slightly down. Hands loose. Breathing even. The guard at the desk looked up, registered Solomon, looked through Daniel the way people look through men they have categorized as belonging to someone else, and looked back at his screen. 240 times. That was how many shifts Solomon had passed this checkpoint. The guard's mind had filed him under irrelevant so long ago the filing had become automatic. They moved through the eastern corridor. Fluorescent light. Antiseptic and recycled air. Building ventilation providing a steady, indifferent coverage of sounds it was designed to cover. At the junction before Section Blue, Solomon stopped. Third door, he said. The words were barely breath. Daniel nodded. Solomon held his position. Daniel moved forward alone. He was 6 feet from the third door when the corridor door at the far end opened. Marcus Webb walked through it. Daniel did not stop. He stepped sideways into a shallow equipment alcove and pressed flat against the wall, heart doing something he had not felt in his body since he was young enough to still feel fear physically rather than managing it mentally. Marcus was on his phone. Moving quickly, with the forward-leaning momentum Daniel had watched for 9 years and read as dedication. His voice was low but the corridor was quiet. It needs to happen tomorrow morning, Marcus said. Not Friday. Tomorrow. A pause, listening. Because I have a problem developing and I need it resolved before it becomes a situation. Transfer him before 6. Make sure the record shows standard discharge protocol. Another pause. I don't care what it costs. Make it happen. He passed within 8 feet of the alcove. Daniel did not move. Did not breathe. He looked at the profile of a man he had trusted with every material thing he owned and felt something settle in him that was colder and more permanent than anger. Marcus turned the corner. The corridor door clicked shut. Daniel stood in the alcove for 3 seconds, counting them. Then he moved to the third door, entered the 6-digit code Solomon had memorized across 240 nights of watching people do things they assumed no one was watching, and pushed it open. The room was small. A narrow bed. 2 machines. A window positioned too high to see from the floor. And a boy sitting at a small table, bent over a piece of paper, drawing with a pencil stub held in fingers that had learned economy. He looked up. He was thinner than any photograph. His eyes held a distance that could not have been prepared for. The specific quality of someone who has spent a significant period learning not to want things, because wanting in a place like this was a form of punishment you eventually learn to decline. They looked at each other across a room that should not have existed. Ethan, Daniel said. Ethan did not move. He looked at his father the way you look at something you have imagined so many times you are no longer certain whether what you're seeing is real or another version of the imagining. Dad, he said. Almost silent. Like a word he had been holding for so long he was afraid to let it go. Daniel crossed the room and crouched in front of his son. Something happened in his chest that had no name and did not need one. 11 months of grief built entirely on a manufactured lie meeting the reality of his son 3 feet away, alive, thin, drawing imaginary windows in a room without a reachable sky. The force of that meeting went through Daniel Carter in a wave that he made no attempt to stop, and for the first time in 11 months he did not manage it or redirect it or file it somewhere it would not interfere with function. His hands, when he reached for his son's face, were not steady. Something in his expression gave way. His voice, when it came, broke on the last word cleanly and without apology. "I did not know where you were," he said. "The hour I found out. The hour I came." Ethan looked at him. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was working against something larger than he could comfortably carry alone. "They showed me papers," Ethan said. "They said you signed them. They said every word they told you about me was a lie," Daniel said. "Every document. Every signature. Every single thing they said." Ethan looked down at the paper on the table. A window. An imaginary sky. Clouds shaped like the ones he used to point at from his father's shoulders in tall buildings. "I kept my birthday card," Ethan said quietly. "From my last birthday. Before. I kept it the whole time." He stopped. "Even after I stopped believing you'd come." Daniel could not speak for a moment. "I stopped believing it every day," Ethan said. "After month 6. I still kept saying it out loud. Because saying it felt like it kept something alive." He paused. "But I stopped believing it." Daniel put both hands on the sides of his son's face, the way you hold something you have been given back after believing it was gone permanently, and felt the full weight of those words settle into him. Not just the 11 months. The specific, prolonged cruelty of a child spending 6 months in a locked room maintaining faith and then spending 5 more maintaining the habit of faith after the faith itself had gone through. He held his son. He did not speak. There was nothing language could do in this moment that was more useful than simply staying. He held Ethan in a room engineered to take things from him, and for this moment, the room lost. Then Daniel pulled back and looked at his son directly. "For minutes," he said. "I need for minutes of trust from you. Can you do that?" Ethan wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at his father. Then he nodded once, with the particular decisiveness of someone choosing to try again after they had stopped. "Yes," he said. They moved. Solomon in the corridor. The security team positioned at the eastern exit. 3 minutes through the facility. But at the final corner before the service door, Solomon raised his hand. A guard. Standing at the exit with his back partially turned, speaking into a radio, his body blocking the door at an angle that left no clean passage. Daniel put his hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "Still. Wait." The guard spoke. 30 seconds. 40. His radio crackled back at him. He shifted his weight, turned slightly, looked down the side corridor. 8 seconds. Then he moved down the side corridor and his back was to them and Solomon was through the door and Ethan was through the door and Daniel was through the door and the night air hit them all at once, cold and real and enormous after the filtered interior of the facility. Ethan stopped. He looked up at the sky. Cold, dark, citybright at the horizon, with stars managing to be visible above it. He stood there with his face turned upward and his eyes open, breathing air that had not been regulated or recycled or controlled for him. Daniel stood beside him and said nothing. Some things are diminished by commentary. Then Ethan said, without looking down, "Annie found you." "Yes." "I told her your name every time she came," Ethan said. "Every single visit. I said it out loud so it stayed real." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to hold the drawings up in the dark. When the room was quiet and the machines were running. I'd hold one up and talk to it like it was you." Daniel waited. "I'd say, he doesn't know where I am yet. But when he finds out, he'll come. I know he will." Ethan paused. "I kept saying that. Even after month 6. Daniel put his arm around his son's shoulders. Not guiding. Just there. Present, in the specific way he had not been present for 11 months and intended to spend a significant portion of the rest of his life making different. They walked to the car. Paul Reyes published at 5 the following morning. Precise. Documented. The corporate structure concealing the facility had been engineered for invisibility rather than resilience, and it did not survive simultaneous legal and journalistic pressure applied from multiple directions. By 7, 3 major outlets carried the story. By 9, warrants had been executed at 3 connected addresses simultaneously. What the warrants uncovered was worse than Daniel had reported to Paul. Worse than Claire had found. The research program that held Ethan was not built around one child. The intake records, once accessed, showed other names. Other dates. Other rare profiles documented with the clinical detachment of a program that had been running long enough to develop its own administrative vocabulary. Paul called Daniel when the records were confirmed. 7, Paul said. His voice had the quality it got when a story exceeded what he had prepared himself to find. 7 children, Daniel. All rare hematological profiles. All within the last 3 years. Daniel was sitting in his car outside his own house. He looked at his hands for a long moment. Find every family, he said. Give me the names. I'll make the calls myself. There was a pause. You don't have to do that. Yes, Daniel said quietly. I do. Marcus Webb was taken into custody that afternoon. He was composed when it happened, in the manner of a man who has been aware of this specific outcome for some time and has spent considerable energy postponing it without ever successfully preventing it. He asked to speak to Daniel. When the request was relayed, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table watching Ethan and Annie argue about the correct construction methodology for a block tower. He looked at the message on his phone for a moment. Then he set the phone face down on the table. There was nothing Marcus could say that mattered more than what he had already done. And there was nothing in this kitchen, in this moment, that Daniel was willing to interrupt for Marcus Webb. Thorne cooperated immediately upon formal approach. He had always cooperated with whoever was in the strongest position. It had not become a character feature recently. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in the cemetery again. Ethan beside him. Annie and Solomon a few steps back, alongside Mrs. Alvarez, who had asked to come and who no one had thought to refuse. 2 men from a stone removal company worked at the grave. The headstone came free with a low scraping sound that carried no drama, only the particular finality of something false being separated from earth it had misrepresented for 11 months. Ethan was holding a drawing. His best window. The sky outside it was the most detailed he had ever managed. Every cloud shape he had memorized from years of standing on his father's shoulders in tall buildings, pressing his small hand against cold glass, naming shapes in a private language between a father and a son. Can we bury it? Ethan asked. So the space has something true in it. They crouched together at the edge of the vacancy where the stone had been. Father and son placed the drawing into the earth with their hands. Covered it together. Carefully. When they stood, Ethan looked at the place for a long time. Not with grief. With something more deliberate. The expression of someone choosing to call something finished and meaning the choice. I made that one on my last night there, Ethan said. I didn't know it was the last night. But I was thinking about the windows in your office. The ones that looked out over the whole city. I used to pretend I could see them from where I was. Daniel looked at the covered earth. Then he looked at his son. You can see them from where you are now, Daniel said. Ethan nodded once. Then he reached for his father's hand. Not the reflexive grab of a small child. Deliberately. The way you reach for something you have decided you are allowed to have. They walked away from the grave together through the cemetery, the drawing buried behind them, the stones stacked at the path's edge waiting to be taken away permanently. Annie fell into step beside Ethan. You know what my granddaddy says about lies? She asked. Ethan glanced at her. What? He says a lie is just a wall, Annie said. And walls can't last forever. Because the truth keeps leaning on them. Ethan considered this for several steps. The truth leaned pretty hard, he said. It did, Annie agreed. Took it a while though. 11 months, Ethan said. Yeah, Annie said. But it got there. That evening the kitchen of the big house held more people than it had held in years. Annie argued with Ethan about block tower architecture with the conviction of someone who has strong opinions and no intention of compromising them. Solomon ate with the quiet ease of a man who has recently been allowed to set down something he carried for too long. Mrs. Alvarez kept filling plates without being asked, because that was the language she used for things she did not put into words. At one point Annie looked across the table at Daniel. "What are you building now?" she asked. A practical question from a practical child. Daniel considered it the way it deserved. "Something I'm actually present for," he said. Annie nodded. "Correct answer." She returned to the block tower debate. Later, after Solomon had taken Annie home and Mrs. Alvarez had gone, and Ethan was nearly asleep, Daniel sat in his office with the small red boat on the desk beside the last of the legal files. The boat Ethan had constructed at the facility from materials accumulated over months, because making things was the way he had kept himself intact. Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Dad," he said. Daniel looked at him. "I'm glad you dropped the flowers," Ethan said. Daniel looked at the boat. Then at his son standing in the doorway in his pajamas, thin still, but here. Present. Real. Standing in a doorway in his own home with both feet on ground that belonged to him. "Me too," Daniel said. Ethan went to bed. Daniel sat for a while longer in the quiet that was no longer the silence of an empty house but the silence of a house between sounds, the silence belonging to places where people sleep because they feel safe enough to sleep. There is a kind of man who spends his whole life building strength outward, layering achievement and composure and control until the outside looks so solid that even he forgets there might be something underneath worth protecting. Daniel Carter had been that man for a long time. But a small girl had stood at a grave and said the impossible out loud when every adult around her had chosen not to. And a boy in a room with no windows had held drawings up in the dark for 5 months after his faith wore through, still saying the words, keeping the habit of belief alive past the point where the belief itself could sustain it. And a man who cleaned floors for a living had looked at a stranger on his doorstep and said, without any reason to trust him, "Tell me what you need." The most important things are never protected by systems. They are protected by people who choose to act when acting costs them something real. Daniel picked up the red boat and held it for a moment. Then he set it down precisely in the space where it belonged, beside a photograph of a boy pointing at clouds through cold glass, and turned off the light. He went to say good night to his son.